So first thing first, I know we've done this before, but still, like, can you introduce
Yeah,
yourself for the audience?
yeah, for sure. So second time around, I'm still Jeff Puls, the head strength coach of the Chicago Bulls. Um, yeah, I mean, I think you got all the dirty details on the last one, but took a long road here. Worked at a couple different places, mainly the University of Notre Dame before this. I was in the United States Marine Corps before that. Did about a million internships somewhere in between there, and now I find myself with the Chicago Bulls for the last 6 years.
Nice, nice, nice. Oh, by the way, um, our football team just beat Notre Dame last week.
I'm aware of that. I'm well aware of that.
Sorry about that.
Well, hey, great game, great game. I'm very disappointed in Notre Dame's football team right now. As a fan and former employee, I expect them to win every single game. So
Yeah, of course, of
they're
course.
actually playing right now. They got USC, so
Yeah,
they can bounce back and have a game that they should be having every game. So
yeah, they'll win that.
yeah, I think so. They better.
So, this podcast started after our last recording that I asked you about like fitness fatigue model and how to like utilize like force plate data to like monitor like functional overreaching or non-functional overreaching, and which I find it really helpful. So first of all, like, can you like explain a little like what is fitness fatigue model?
Yeah, so that's actually a really great intro and great question. So looking at the fitness fatigue, the two factor theory, I guess, for the fitness fatigue model versus the one factor theory, the simple super compensation model. Covering both, I guess, would be, you want to cover the super compensation model because that's the easiest one. I think that's the one that every strength coach kind of learns to start, where you have a workout, you're fatigued, so your preparedness is kind of down here, it loops down, and you're always trying to recover back up to homeostasis or baseline, right? So assuming you have one session, you get fatigued. If you recover, you'll supercompensate above the line, and now you're more prepared. Okay, your level of homeostasis is a little higher. You can stack a couple workouts on top of one another, and hopefully you recover and compensate above, your norm, and that's how you make improvements, right? That's the original theory. Um, as you know, I don't know who's all listening to this podcast, but I'm sure we've read Science and Practice before by Zatsiorsky and Kramer, and they cover the two factor theory, which honestly, like I remember reading that for the first time in college and being very confused on how that model works and what it actually meant, because you have your workout, and then it's like your fitness is up here and your fatigue is down here, and there's a line in the middle, and after time they both kind of meet, and then there's a third line that's preparedness that kind of, it's right above fatigue, and it kind of gets above your homeostasis line before fatigue gets back. So it was very confusing. So I'd love to do my best. I'll try to clear it up for everyone or try to explain it my way. But basically, so the two factor theory is, if you have a bout of exercise, what that's going to do is you're going to assume that after you exercise, whatever quality you were looking to train, your level of fitness or your level of fitness for that quality is going to be improved above where your homeostasis was, or your previous level. Unfortunately, as we all know, exercise will immediately fatigue you. So you are fatigued from that. So you kind of have these two factors fighting one another, saying, yes, you're fit in that quality, but it's also very fatiguing right after. And what's going to happen is, as you recover, the fatigue is going to get better because you're recovered, but the fitness from that quality is also going to come kind of back down to homeostasis. And what you want, to keep it simple, the two factor theory only looks at one workout, but what you want to do is stack workouts in a way that before your fitness comes back down to a homeostatic level, your previous level, and also before your fatigue, and hopefully before your fatigue takes over too much, your level of preparedness kind of overreaches, right? And I think it's kind of a difficult way. You try to put a graph to how does training affect the body, and I guess it's the best way to graph it. And I probably made that explanation a little worse. Just go read the book. But what you want to do is you truly want to stack workouts or have a workout that raises your level of homeostasis in that given quality, right? So if let's take it super simple from a dumb strength coach's perspective. If I can squat 400 pounds, I want to stack strength workouts in a way that's going to allow me to squat 405 pounds or 410 pounds or 500 pounds, right? So immediately after a heavy, heavy max effort squat day, listen, I'm going to be great at squatting technically, and my body will recover. But immediately after that squat workout, I'm probably not maxing out in sprints for time. I'm probably not jumping as high as I could. I'm probably not doing anything that involves max strength because my fatigue is so great, right? But I will recover from that. And hopefully, as I recover, I'll also have compensated above my previous level and be able to squat a little more. And that's a very basic example of just looking at squat. Obviously, we're looking at performance, not just training a single exercise, but it's a good way to kind of explain what the two-factor theory is, right? I'm not going to lie. Like, I think it's all bullshit. I think it's all a little sticky. It's compensation to exercise, man. Like, your body is such a complex organism that you can't say like this one thing is going to affect you this much and fatigue you this much, and eventually you're going to recover and you'll be better. Like, not necessarily, right? The bout of workout has to be the right dosage. The time for recovery has to be the right dosage. What you're doing during your workout has to be the proper implementation to get compensation for what you wanted, right? It's very, very fluid, and we're such complex creatures when it comes to fitness that you can't just stick a graph out there and say, this is what happens. It's here and it's here, and they all meet in the middle, and you get like, no, like it just does. It's a little dirtier than that. So, yeah, man, that was my rough, complex, poor explanation of our approach to the two-factor theory of fitness and fatigue. So,
Hey man, I love it. To be
I probably
honest,
just pissed off all of your viewers, being like, "What the hell? Just go read the book, man. Just go read the book and decide for yourself."
yeah, man. I I totally love it because like I started I want to ask this is because like uh a few weeks ago we like our strength staff and our interns are kind of like discussing like what is fitness fatigue model.
Mhm.
And at that time I realized that even our staff is not that familiar with fitness fatigue model. I'm like, okay. And so that's the reason kind of like I kind of want you to explain that a little, but to be honest, I totally agree with you that it's kind of like bullshit that our body doesn't work that way, bro.
Yeah, the body
So
it just
yeah,
doesn't work that way.
yeah. So um as a strength coach, our main job is to like help our athlete to adapt. Well, like you mentioned, adapt, try to improve at the same time to prevent like uh overtraining. But before overtraining, there's like functional overreaching and non-functional overreaching.
Yep.
So can you also explain that a little?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I believe that's probably the second part of your first question. I didn't get to overreaching, but it's a pretty broadly used term, right? Like, what is functional versus non-functional overreaching versus full-blown overtrained, right? So I think we're always trying to get our athletes into that functional overreaching stage in hopes that they can recover, right? And then you get that compensation, and now their new level is a little higher, right? I will say, kind of put a disclaimer there that early working with basketball in the NBA, there when we get into our season, there's not really an opportunity to recover. So you're hoping to keep guys shy of non-functional overreaching, and even early in the season, it's fine to be functionally overreaching, but you really don't want to tiptoe that line too much. It gets really dangerous because there's not going to be a recovery period. But speaking for strength coaches, off season, any other situation that's a little more structured, functional overreaching is basically training the body to a point where we talked about either the 1 or 2 factor theory. You're fatiguing. Functional overreaching has been able to still perform at a high level, but you're going to see decrements in performance, but not so much that you can't come back from it, right? So after a proper amount of recovery, you'll be able to come back from this functional overreaching and actually supercompensate or have a level of over-preparedness of whatever factor you want to look at from those qualities that you've been fatiguing, right? You get into non-functional overreaching, and this is pretty much your gray area of, this is almost your point of no return. Now, not only are you seeing poor performances in the things that you're training because fatigue has become so great, you may not be able to come back from that. And this is kind of where you see guys really fall off. Their resting heart rate goes way up. Their HRV scores are shit. Their performance is awful. They might get mono. Like these are things you'll see. You'll get some, get into the weasel. You can get some HPA axis dysfunction. You can really start messing your body up from a performance standpoint to a point where you might have just cost that athlete some significant time during their performance period. So it's not something you really want to tiptoe. I'm not saying it's the worst. It's funny. I'm going to get a little diatribe here, but we actually used to have this conversation a little more when I was at the University of Notre Dame, just because there were more strength coaches to have these conversations with. And I would always have this, everything you have is in a lens of your life perspective, right? And as I said before, I was in the military, I was in the Marines. Even during boot camp from day one, it's 13 weeks of every day, no days off. You're running everywhere. You're not eating enough. You're getting stress from every level, not just physical stress, emotional stress, no sleep. You're non-functionally overreached for a good amount of time, but you still make it through. You still perform. Like my run times got better. My strength got better. So like, I just have a hard time being so black and white about like what's functional versus non-functional overreaching, what's overtraining. I promise you I was overtrained for several weeks during boot camp, if not shit for a year during my first year of service. So I think we get a little too soft when it comes to that. And we kind of, I don't want to say we baby athletes, but we're very cautious. We're very conservative as strength coaches. And I don't know if it's a good thing. I know it's safe and I know we're doing best by our athletes, but I think they can handle a little more than what we give them. And I think we kind of hide behind that curtain of overreaching and overtraining. And sometimes you just got to say, is a couple 3-hour practices day after day after day going to overtrain somebody? Yes, your risk of injury goes up, but in reality, like, man, 18, 19, 20 years old, if you can't do something hard for 5 days in a row because you're going to be too fatigued to do it on the 6th day, I think we have a bigger problem here, right? Now, that being said, if you don't give good guidance with knowing the science of kind of how the human body wants to work, where it can work hard, it needs to recover, and you increase that risk of injury, a guy, he gets tired, his muscles not functioning properly, his nervous system is shot, and he hurts himself, then maybe you didn't do a great job as a strength coach, and you didn't put that athlete in the best position to succeed. So we're always battling that, like, how much is too much versus how much isn't enough, right? And we want to push that limit without going over. And honestly, like, I haven't found the answer, and every athlete's a little different. Every person's a little different. And I think you try to do what you think is best. But I will say, and I'll give advice to young coaches, don't get so stressed out when things look like they're getting too much or really hard. The human body's really resilient. And I think, as long as there's going to be time down the road that you can get that recovery, I think it's okay to get a little more in than you think the athletes can handle.
Yeah, man, I love this.
And that was a long one. I have thoughts on this.
No, I love it. I love it. So, and because like I came from Taiwan, there's like all the time the athlete like train 4 hours a day every day. Is and when we get them like 2 or 3 days of recovery, man, the performance just shoot up.
Skyrockets, right?
Yeah, man. So I totally understand that. But like you mentioned, there's like young strength coaches out there who didn't have like that much of a experience, but they have like resources like force plate, like GPS data.
For sure.
For force plate, is there like what how about this? Is peak metric, like peak force, peak um power a good metric to determine like non-functional overreaching or overreaching?
Yeah,
I know it depends. I know it's a hard one, bro.
It always depends. I want to go back to the last part a little bit when I'm talking about pushing athletes to kind of more than what we're comfortable with. I will say that's a very off-season approach. You want to build that robustness as much as you can, and you can get away with as long as they don't get injured, which is easy to say. As long as they don't get injured, that's your job to make sure they don't. But it is okay to push them hard in the off-season as long as they have time to recover. But when we get in season, that's when you have a lot less control over the stresses given to them. So you do want to have a little closer guidance on, like, I'll talk for the NBA season, 3.5 games a week. Man, like if we're playing 4 games in a week and we're practicing 2 of those other days, and then when they have 1 day off, we need to make sure that we can't control. We want the intensity of the games to be as high as possible, right? I want those guys to be firing on all cylinders, regardless of their readiness state. They need to be there. Now we can control how hard or how much they do in practice, typically. So those other 2 practice days, maybe the guy just played back-to-back 40 minutes each game, and he's got, 1 day, and then he has another game. Maybe that practice day is going to be a light day for him, right? And then we want him to hit again on that next game. And then maybe we'll have 2 days in between where maybe we'll just give him a complete day off or do some passive recovery. And then the next day we'll practice again. So you need to structure it that way with a little more of a conservative approach. But in the off season, I'm like a big kitchen sink guy. Like, let's get these guys. Don't worry about functional overreaching. Don't worry about non-functional overreaching unless he gets, the flu because you gave it to him through training. Try, like, raise his level, right? Raise that threshold tolerance to a level that he's never or she's never seen before. So that's the caveat to the last part. Now, force plate stuff is super interesting. We use the Vault system. I think I mentioned the last one, we use the Vault system. So force plates, NordBoard, force frame, testing it all, right? But force plates are really complex. And I think the main thing I see most staffs, or especially young coaches who are just getting into doing, is doing too much. Like, they look at too many metrics. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I've gone down that rabbit hole of exploring and trying to understand every single metric, and then paring down what do I think is important. And I always, here and there, we're always adding and removing stuff. I have a great staff here who we have great conversations about it. But, our sports scientist, Brian Serrano, my assistant, Matt Comer, like, it's almost every day we're talking about, hey, what about this variable? What about this variable? But I always go back to, like, I like peak. What's peak force doing in the eccentric phase? What's peak force doing in the concentric phase? What's peak power doing? What are the time components of each phase? Impulse is I used to love impulse because that's like a total time and work kind of. I'm kind of gotten off that a little bit. I like to break that down and say, nope, what's our power? What's our time components? I'm good with that, because those are where you're going to see the changes when an athlete is starting to dip. And usually it's the eccentric portion that dips first. Usually he gets slower. His depth in his descent becomes more shallow. They're basically not wanting to perform that eccentric portion because it's very stressful on the body. So they're trying to save that energy and still utilize that stretch shortening cycle so they can perform just as well. And you'll see the concentric portion maybe not change. It might stay the exact same, but now if your eccentric time goes up, your total time has gone up. If your eccentric force has gone down, it changes your strategy during the concentric portion. So you'll see these changes. That's what I like to look at from test to retest, especially throughout the season to see how a guy's doing. And it's never perfect, and sometimes it just raises more questions, but it allows you to have a little data to maybe ask better questions about the athlete. And usually there's a reasonable answer, like, yeah, man, we just had a back-to-back and you made me jump and I'm tired. You're like, I get that. But bro, I want to see how you jump when you're tired. So that way, if what I think is a normal schedule and you're just you don't notice it creeping up on you and I jump you and you have these very similar jump profile, I can say, hey, how you feeling, bro? Oh yeah, I am a little tired. Okay, well, how about since we're supposed to have a hard practice today, I talk to coach and we kind of see maybe we should pull back on the volume a little bit. So it helps us do our job a little better, helps us keep the guys fresh. Because in my world, the only thing that matters is winning games, and they got to show up and play the game. I know you got to practice. I know you got to lift weights. I know you got to prepare your body, and that's all part of it. But the only thing that matters is winning games. So we'll use the force plate to help us keep guys ready and primed as often as we can. And we don't test every day. We don't test even every week. My frequency of training and jumping guys on the force plates usually, once every 1 to 2 weeks. Sometimes, some of our veteran guys who don't love to do it, maybe once a month. And that's a whole nother, I won't even use force plates for fatigue monitoring then. I basically use it for test, retest on the effectiveness of our training protocols. So again, another dirty answer. I'm getting kind of long-winded here, but you're asking some good questions right now.
Man, I love it. But so when it comes to like peak metric or like eccentric metric, like you mentioned, like eccentric metric is, or like peak is like peak power or like peak force. It happens in like thousand of a second. Isn't that gonna like fluctuate a lot to like maybe not that accurate, or like eccentric also fluctuate a lot? Isn't that being too noisy?
It can get noisy. Again, what jump protocol are you using? Are you hands on hips, which is a lot cleaner than the Abala cover, the arms free jump? I don't look at rates of force or peak production because that gets really, really chaotic. And those are all over the board. And when strategy changes because of fatigue, those numbers go crazy. And I found it almost impossible to find consistency in a way that's valuable to track. But that being said, if you look at peak power or peak force and at what point in time those occur during the jumps, that can give you some insight to fatigue as well, right? So if it's happening later, or if your peak eccentric peak force is happening earlier, you'd be like, oh shit, yeah, he's producing power and he's producing force earlier. Not necessarily a good thing, since they might be taking longer to do the movement, but they're going more shallow, or maybe they're taking less time eccentrically because they're just not putting any effort into the eccentric portion, right? So you have to look at kind of a part to whole approach, like, okay, the eccentric stuff, he spent less time, but he's less shallow, his force is less, and it's happening earlier, versus his concentric portion is the exact same. Well, something's changing there, right? Like, what's going on? Oh, he's sore. He doesn't want to go in his descent. He doesn't want to give anything to that eccentric portion just so he can still perform the concentric jump. Honestly, like, you'll see the eccentric's a little more sensitive, but you'll see decreases in concentric power, usually jump height, when a guy really gets fatigued. Especially, like, I challenge anyone to jump any of their guys basketball wise post game or like the day after. You'd almost debate if you should even do it, right? Because that fatigue just sets in. It's like, okay, like, even if you're warmed up, you're fatigued. So, but I guess I have this silo and my scope of vision is just the NBA right now, where we live in that state. Like, it's like, play a game, scramble to recovery, scramble to maintain your physical qualities, and then play the next game. It's like, man, So it's good to get that monitoring, but again, you don't want to overwhelm yourself and you don't want to overthink your practices work, your recovery strategies work, your training works. Trust that. Use the force plates, use the Nord board, use the force frame, use the Connexon on-court tracking like Catapult, just to keep an eye on the guys and be able to use common sense in your coaching acumen to ask the right questions, right? Or to, be a little conservative and make sure the guy's ready for the next game and kind of save him from himself, save him from everything, including the strength coach. Maybe you have a great strength day plan and it's like, yeah, he killed it last night. We had a good lift a day ago. I don't need to kill him in training today. Maybe we're going to do a recovery session, right? So it's just a piece of the puzzle. Like force plate metrics it's a piece of the puzzle. It's a great piece. It offers the right questions. But again, there's no black and white definitive answer. There's no, oh my God, if this happens, you have to do this. Absolutely not. If this happens, you should ask this question or a group of questions, but then see what the answer is and figure it out from there. It's the fun part about strength conditioning.
Yeah. So like, just one of the a conclusion of that. It's like, even if the jump height kind of like decrease a bit, let's say from 50, I use centimeters, I'm from Taiwan, use centimeters.
Yeah,
from 55 to like 52, I mean, it's okay. There's like, maybe it's just fatigue right now.
Yeah, that's literally, that's what, a little over an inch.
Yeah.
Like, man, I'm going to tell you, I could get guys that are fresh every day that might have a 3 centimeter variance in their jumps just because it's a different day,
Yeah.
And I think, you sum that up really nicely. Like, that's kind of the point I'm getting at, is like, it's okay to have the metrics. What I would tell your listeners and other strength coaches to do is find the ones that matter to you. Again, like, we use the Vault system. I've got, a bunch of colleagues that use the Hawkins system, which is becoming really popular. Vault doesn't do something like the Hawkins does. I think it's peak propulsive force or peak propulsive power, or peak propulsion, something. Vault doesn't do that. I'm like, are we missing something that's crazy? Is Hawkins like, have they figured it out? And it's like, no, they just found a metric that works for them and their coaches, and it's a great metric, but it's nobody's ever like, there's no cracking the code, right? It's just,
Yeah.
how are we analyzing and assessing these jumps to figure out what's best for our athletes from a fatigue standpoint, from a training standpoint, from a performance improvement standpoint. So, it's really finding what you want. I like the peak metrics. I like the time metrics. I like the asymmetry metrics, which I didn't even talk about, but that's huge for us. So it's kind of the KISS method, man. Like, keep it simple, and that's the best way to do it.
Yeah. So, this one comes from like the previous answer you mentioned, that like besides all those data, maybe like something we should like just look into how our athlete moves. So if you see like, or if you see a, let's say, point guard, sorry,
Good.
he just like, the way he run just a little bit off, the mechanic is somewhat wrong. Like, would you like uh kind of correct his running mechanic, or like do something else about it?
That's a good question. Being in basketball, I usually do not mess with guys running mechanics when they're trying to accomplish a different skill. Okay, so if they're doing layups, or they're cutting to the basket, or if they're driving, or they're playing defense, and I see them sprint down the court, like, I will not correct them when they're doing another skill. However, we make it an emphasis to warm up and prep every single guy before he does court work, right? Sometimes it's as a group. I make guys come in for their individual sessions before practice, before training, before game. So we get hands and eyes on every single guy. And we will do some usually linear and lateral track preparation work. And that's how you can kind of see if a guy, isn't getting his simple as like a high knee run if his knees aren't coming up all the way, or a lateral slide if he's cutting the slide short because his groin is tight. If he's not contacting the ground on the ball of his foot with some force because his Achilles is really, really tired or his calves are blown out, like you can see things then. If they start running and the gait is wrong, usually it's all fatigue driven. But again, if you see that stuff, you can ask the question. But a lot of times it's like, what are you going to do about it? Right? So his gait's messed up, but he has to play a game in, an hour or 2 hours. Are you going to be like, oh, he can't play. He's not running quite right tonight. No, absolutely not. You're going to figure out what's causing that gait dysfunction or that slide dysfunction or that sprint dysfunction. And you're going to try to correct it as much as you can. And hopefully it can be corrected just with a warm-up corrective, some specific work, maybe some manual therapy. You're going to do your best, but then you're going to get them out there to play, right? So I think what you're alluding to is like what's lost is the art of coaching. Coach dudes, like, how a guy should move, but everybody's movement's like a work of art, man. Nothing's going to be the same. And that's okay. As long as it's kind of within that acceptable parameters, keep them inside that. If they're outside with one thing, don't freak out. Try to correct them. But at the end of the day, can they run? Can they jump? Can they perform their sport safely? Get them to that point and be happy. And just cross your fingers and get them to the next game. Like that's where we're at. So what you're alluding to is the art of coaching. And listen, I'm not going to correct a guy when he's working on something else. I can take time to correct him. And I'm not going to lie. Like I think running or sprinting is if you're a track athlete, yes, 100%. That's your sport. That's what you do. All other sports, most other sports, like I think track is an amazing training tool. Track coaches are like, that's the ultimate coach. Every sport sprints, every sport jumps for the most part, right? Great training tool, have expertise in that. But when they get out there and they start playing their sport, you got to pull away from the specifics and perfection of track a little bit and allow them to be free and move in a free motion, right? And again, as long as if it's within that window of acceptable movement, be okay with it. Just be okay with it.
Nice. I really love it. So after that, I kind of want to go back to the data stuff. We talk about like force plate. This time I kind of want to talk about like GPS. I know you guys use Connexon and we use Catapult right now, but whatever. So when it comes like overtraining or overreaching, whatever, I know like everything counts. There's not certain thing, but is there like certain like metrics you guys gonna discuss, like maybe change of direction rate of like or like max velocity?
Sure. Great question. And yeah, it's Connexon versus Catapult, whatever. They're movement tracking systems, right? They're IMUs. I think Catapult uses GPS still. Connexon uses it's an internal, you can't use GPS, it's an internal system. So it's RFID, like a radio frequency system with an IMU. But when you're tracking like overreaching or just movement in general, it's funny. We just went through camp. So what you'll see is a lot of guys, they worked out in the off season. They tried to get ready, but nobody's ever really ready for camp, right? So camp is really hard. These guys are, and this is the standard, like mechanical load, training load, intensity, distance, speed, number of sprints, changes, all that good stuff, right? And we're tracking all this, and it's like each of those variables it's a higher metric load quantity than any of these guys have seen since the end of last season. So obviously fatigue is really going to set in, and we can use the tracking system not only to see what they're doing and compare it to maybe last year's preseason and camp and the year before that, if we have the same guys there, but we can also guide the coaches and help to guide the coaches on like, hey man, like last practice, I know you wanted it to be hard. It was really freaking hard. And now you have a decision of what you want to recommend to the coach. Hey, should we go hard again? Should we not go quite as hard? Maybe it's a recovery day because 2 days prior, maybe the 2 days leading up to that were also hard. And this was just the third day and it was super hard, right? Where do you want to go as a coach? What's right? What's right? What's wrong? Right? So you got to make that decision. But this gives you objective data to make those recommendations, right? What I really like, Connexon does a great thing. It's high metabolic variables. So high metabolic power, high metabolic distance. Basically, it's distance covered in a high metabolic state, doing difficult high intensity things versus just the total distance they covered regardless of speed and intensity, right? So we can look at some of those, we call them just high met variables. I also love to look at number of sprints, right? If you're tired, it's simple. You're going to hit. Now they quantify their sprints like high intensity sprints to medium to low. I think there's 5 different levels. Like if you're tired, you're not going to have those high intensity. You're not going to have as many, right? It's pretty freaking simple. Like look at sprint numbers. And again, the practice type and the practice plan will dictate some of those. But in general, I like to compare a guy to himself, but if you're looking at the rest of the team that ran the same drills and they ran 50 sprints on the day, and the dude that you're looking at is like, why did he only run 20? Maybe he's tired, right? His total distance is down a little bit. His high met distance is down a little bit. You start to paint this picture. You start to gather all this information. So, I mean, the tracking systems are amazing. I will say the disclaimer to that is we're trusting that they're accurate, right? I know that Catapult's been validated, Connexon's been validated. You're still trusting, right? I think when I first started using Catapult, God, I'm dating myself, over a decade ago, right? There was a lot of questions of those outdoor units. I think they're all running at like 100 hertz now, maybe higher. I think that the first units were like 10 hertz and they were inaccurate to like 5 meters. I'm just like, if you're an offensive lineman in American football, you don't move 5 meters sometimes. So like you're trying to tell me like, this isn't saying it was bad. I'm just saying like, you do have to make sure you just trust that the accuracy is there. And I know that technology's come such a long way, right? And you do say like, okay, if it says he did 50 sprints, I'm trusting he did 50 sprints, right? And you're tracking it that way. And hopefully there's consistency from session to session on the accuracy, the reliability of these systems. But I still think they're game changers, man. Like tracking what guys are doing on the court is like, that's exactly what we want. We're quantifying work, right? And then you can recommend the next day and the next day. And then you can have fun as a coach and be like, how do you want to plan out your week? Some coaches like, we got to go hard and then soft and then hard and then soft, right? Some coaches are like, fuck it. Let's go 4 days on, 2 days off. All right. We're going to go hard for 4 days, but then those 2 days, let's make sure guys aren't sneaking on there and overworking, or maybe guys are completely blown out by that third day. And you're like, man, that third day was supposed to be hard, coach. And the guys just didn't have it. Look at these metrics, talk to the guys. This fourth day that was supposed to be super hard, we got to go light. Like it's just for the safety of the guys and the performance overall. Right. So yeah, man, the tracking, Catapult, Connexon, whatever, it's awesome. I don't think it should be overlooked. I think it's very expensive and it's not everybody has access to it. That being said, if you have access, learn your system, learn the metrics. Same thing with force plates, figure out what metrics are important and, have a core group of metrics, and then you can play around outside of that. And it's only going to make you a better coach and only going to make you a better practitioner and a better guide for the team and better for the guys or girls to keep them, safe and performing well. So that's my take on, tracking.
Nice. Personally, I think like before I came into the state, I never used like Catapult or Connexon. Now I use Catapult. It's like dream come true, man.
It's great, isn't it?
Easier for me.
It's just so much easier. And
yeah,
it's nothing takes away from being a coach, right? Nothing takes away from seeing a guy walk in the door the next day. Hey, how you doing? Having a conversation. seeing how he's moving in the weight room, talking to him, seeing what his demeanor, nothing takes away from that. But if we can put objective data to how he's actually moving, that's what textbooks are written about. Like, this is the dream. This is a walking, moving, breathing lab. Like, man, it doesn't get any better. But we do need to understand that this is the real world. It's applied science, right? So not everything has to be written in stone, and just like take it as a piece of your overall training puzzle, right? But if you have it, man, yeah, you're right. I mean, people should be excited. It's a dream. And I get discouraged when coaches are like, I don't need that. I don't like that. I don't want that. I'm like, well, why wouldn't you? Those same guys are like, I don't like force plates. It doesn't tell me anything. Like, okay, like, why'd your guy jump higher? Did he get more powerful, or did he just lose 5 pounds and now he's jumping higher, right? Like, I don't understand how people could think that information is a bad thing. It can be used in a bad way, or it can be used incorrectly, but I don't ever believe that information is a bad thing. So even too much, it's your choice to make it too much, right? If you get 200 metrics, I can pare that down to 2 that are important. It's never a bad thing. So yeah,
Love it.
Good stuff.
So, like you said, there's art of coaching, and nowadays, like, young coaches are more and more rely on like these like force plate data, velocity based training, or like whatever it is. How to like balance, like how to like find a way to like not so rely on like the force plate data, or how to combine or balance the art of coaching and science.
That's a great question. Listen, I'll be quite honest. Like, you don't need anything, right? You do not need movement tracking on the court. You don't need force plates. You don't need, tendo units or gym aware, whatever velocity based tracking. You don't need any of it, right? If you can't train a guy and trust that what you're trying to accomplish in your phase of training isn't going to take effect and happen, then I'm sorry, but like, a velocity based training unit isn't going to help you, right? If I'm trying to get you more powerful, I'm taking you through a velocity phase of training where we're going to go a little lighter, but I want you to move the bar or dumbbell or whatever as fast as possible, and we're going to sprint, and I want to decrease your total sprint time and increase your movement. Like, if you need to have a tendo unit to get a guy to move a bar faster, like, you're already lost, right? Like, there is a little bit of that. You need to have a coach's eye. You need to be able to train a guy and trust that what you're doing is appropriate and taking effect. That being said, having the technology is just giving you validation or correcting you if you are wrong, which, hey, I've been wrong more times than I've been right. And it's great to have technology to, double check my work a little bit and say, man, we just went through a power phase of training. And for some reason, as I'm looking at my force plate metrics with this guy, and I'm looking at my power output on our gym awares, this guy's not doing what I thought he was going to do. But then you can step back and say, why, right? Maybe the guy right next to him did improve how you thought he was. So why wasn't this guy? Shit. Like, maybe because we weren't consistent with our velocity-based training. Maybe I was, prescribing loads that were a little too heavy or a little too light, or maybe the volume was a little too much, right? You can ask the right questions. But at the end of the day, like, if you need a velocity tracker to tell you that your guy is getting faster, moving a bar faster, the velocity tracker is not going to help you train him any better. So it's important to have that art of coaching. Trust yourself, trust the science, trust the principles that we're founded on, and you can train a guy. It's just nice to have those tools. And the tools help me do a better job because it's giving me objective data, right? But at the end of the day, I'm still the one writing the programs. I'm still the one implementing the programs. I'm still the one changing the programs when I decide that a guy isn't ready to train, I was fortunate enough to work with Cal Dietz way back in the day when I was at Minnesota. He's a great strength coach, like one of the smartest human beings I've ever met. He used to hook a tendo unit up to a guy, have a belt squat belt. He'd hook the tendo up and have them jump. and he'd look at the velocity of jumping, and that'd be his readiness cues for the day. You know, if you didn't meet your max velocity or a certain percent of it, you weren't going to do power training that day, right? You were going to do something else. I love coaches that can be that specific with their guys and in a controlled environment. If you're going to dig in, and I say do it. I'm not going to lie, I'm not like that. I will not jump a guy or do a velocity-based tracking to see if he's ready to train. I won't do it. And there are some times when maybe that's not best for the guy. Maybe there's sometimes I shouldn't be implementing a power day when he's not ready to train that way because he's, neurally fatigued or quite frankly, just blown out from life, like from the game before, the practice before. But at the end of the day, like I think we're all going to make those mistakes. And as long as we're doing what's right by the athlete and we're training them to the best of our ability and we're seeing improvements, I think we're okay. Use tech, don't use tech. If you have it, great, but understand it then. Understand it. And if you don't have it, you're forced to be a better coach. And that's good too.
Yeah, love it. Love it. That's kind of like all the question I have for you today. So
cool.
For those who are interested in what we're talking about today, where can they reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Like I'm a big Instagram guy. I don't post all the time and almost just, my wife and my dog and places that I've been out to eat because I love food. But Geoff.Puls, Geoff.Puls. Send me a DM, throw me a follow. I love to have conversations. If we're into a good conversation, I'll usually throw my email out there, give a phone number so that we can have a little deeper conversation. But yeah, any questions, anybody wants to talk, hit me up. I love talking to other coaches. So make it happen.
Cool. Yeah. I know you're running Squatober, right?
I am running Squatober. Yeah. It's kicking my ass right now, but we're getting through. I've stuck to my numbers and I've hit every day. We're trying to stay on track. Like, we're still going to be here in Denver on Monday. So I got to find a squat rack somewhere, but it's, I just turned 40 this year. And I've for the last couple of years squatted, a little over 400, like 401 and some change, cause we use kilos in our weight room. So I'm trying to get 400 at 40. And then I think I'm just going to stop lifting forever. I'm just kidding, but that's my goal. So I'm gonna rock Squatober, and then we'll see what happens from there.
400 kg or 400 pounds?
400 pounds. Sorry, not kg. 400 pounds. Yeah. I work in pounds. It's funny. Our plates we have Alico plates that are in kilograms, but being in the U.S., we work in pounds, so we just do the conversion, and it's a little off. But so a little over 400. I think I was at 408 pounds last year. It's fine. I'm 5'10", like 180, 185. So I'm 400. I'm happy with that, especially at 40 years old. So
yeah. Nice. Yeah.
So are you running? Are you Squatobering?
No. I only sprint, bro.
Come on, man. It'll help you get faster. I hear training makes you faster.
Okay. So maybe